Welcome to the Journal podcast from the Chartered Insurance Institute, a place for thought-provoking discussion from the world of insurance and beyond, giving CII members and the wider profession an insight into key developments across the sector and the work of the CII, the professional body dedicated to building public trust in the insurance profession. I'm Molly Birchall, Communications Executive at the Chartered Insurance Institute. In this episode, we'll be speaking to Michael McCabe, researcher at DAC Beachcroft, to discuss the laws surrounding e-scooters in the UK and the insurance implications of riding e-scooters illegally. Here's my conversation with Michael. Hi, Michael. Thanks for joining me on the podcast today. I hope you're well.
I'm very well, thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Good. Okay. So, Mike, I think the best place to start with this topic is with the basics. So could you explain the current legal status of e-scooters in the UK and any recent changes in legislation? I know there's been quite a lot of debate and confusion around this.
Yes, there are two basic kinds of e-scooters. There's the rental scheme ones that are available in about 30 different places across England. And those are legal to use within the scheme geographical areas. They shouldn't be able to be taken out of those areas, but we have had instances where they are. But like I said, they are allowed to be used on roads and cycle paths within these areas. They are covered by insurance, and you have to have a provisional license to use them, have to be 16, etc. And then there are the privately owned e-scooters, and they are illegal to use on any road or in any public place across the UK. They are allowed to be used on private land with the landowner's permission, obviously, but they cannot be insured. They cannot be used in public, and the problem is that we have approximately 1 million of those across the UK at the moment, and the number is going up. Now, as for recent legislation, there hasn't been any. There was, in 2022, the previous government was planning on introducing laws that would change the definition of privately owned e-scooters. All e-scooters are considered motor vehicles for legal purposes, and there was going to be a change to allow privately owned e-scooters with a certain amount of regulation. But they didn't make it entirely clear what the requirements were going to be for third-party insurance or helmet use, because despite the fact that it making it into the Queen's speech, it never got off the ground. So that is the last we really have in terms of any movement. Labour's previous Transport Secretary, Louise Haigh, had mentioned in a meeting with the Transport Committee that she would like to introduce legislation that would legalize private e-scooters. But then, obviously, she resigned, and there has been no movement on that since either. So that is where we are. At this point, the UK has fallen behind Western Europe in terms of addressing privately owned e-scooters.
Okay, because the trials have been put in place, and I think they've been in place since 2020.
That's right.
And they were meant to conclude, weren't they? But then they've now been, it's been extended. Is that right?
That's right. They were brought into effect in July of 2020. The plan was to run them for 9 months, collect as much data as they could, and then use that data to come up with a plan for how to incorporate e-scooters across the UK's fleet. And the Conservative governments extended the trials 4 times, and now we understand that the current government not only want to extend the trials again, but they want to actually expand them. At the moment, as I said, there are approximately 30 running across England. There are none in Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland, but as we understand it, the intention is to give local authorities more control over the trials. So we could see more of them. And there's no indication as to when they will end.
Yeah. And I've recently found that there used to be loads, I thought, around cities. And now they've minimized the amount of scooters that are in these cities. Is that right?
It depends on which city you're talking about. There has been quite a bit of pushback. There's been some pretty vocal voices across the media complaining about the state of these things, especially when you have rental scooters that aren't put back into docks and you just see them littered across pavements, especially in places where the pavements are very, very narrow. We know that that is a major problem and that quite a few cities have cracked down on this. But the rental providers are cooperating with this quite a bit. But like I said, the government seems to be moving away from tightening controls on the schemes and giving local authorities the power to expand them.
Okay, that sounds positive. And moving on to a more specific scenario then. So what are the legal implications for motorists involved in accidents with uninsured e-scooter riders, so privately owned e-scooters? And how can they recover the cost for damages? That seems like quite a tricky situation.
It is an incredibly tricky situation. If the e-scooter rider is the liable party, then the victim has the ability to use the MIB's uninsured drivers scheme to recover costs. And we know that this has been used quite a bit, and some of these claims can be incredibly expensive. Many of the people involved, many of the victims in these are passengers in motor vehicles. The pedestrians and the cyclists can bring very substantial claims because obviously e-scooters are traveling at significant speeds and they can weigh up to 70 kilos. So if something is barreling towards you at 15 or more miles an hour and it weighs that, they can cause quite a bit of damage. And they will have to use the MIB's uninsured drivers scheme to cover their costs. If it is a motorist who is liable for injuring a e-scooter rider, then obviously their insurance will have to pay out to the e-scooter rider. Despite the fact that it is illegal to use these, they can still, of course, bring a claim. And because the vast majority of them don't wear helmets, because of the weight distribution, they are very top heavy. And majority of the injuries that they suffer are to the head, neck, and shoulders. So they are more severe than they would be if they were, say, on a cycle or if they were pedestrian. So we're seeing high costs to the claims, and that's obviously going to increase motor premiums as they have to pay out.
Yeah, so you don't even have to own an e-scooter for it to impact your motor insurance then?
No, absolutely. These will be spread across policyholders in an effort to try to ease the burdens to individuals.
Okay, that's, very interesting.
And there's also, of course, the fact that the MIB has to pick up the costs for anything that is brought under the uninsured drivers scheme, and that levy will have to be spread across all of the MIB members.
So keeping on track with insurance then, are any legal requirements for e-scooter riders to have insurance? If not, are there any proposed changes to make the insurance mandatory? It feels like this could be a significant shift in policy if that's the case.
Any rental e-scooter comes with third-party cover, and that includes unlimited liability for personal injury. That's included in the cost of the rental. You rent the scooter, you get the insurance. And that system has worked reasonably well. Unfortunately, private e-scooters aren't even able to be insured because they are classified as motor vehicles, but they do not meet type requirements. They cannot be insured. So anyone using one on a road or public place can't get insurance. And there is no indication from the government that they plan on legalizing them in the near future. And even when there was talk of legalizing them, they never made it to the point where they addressed whether or not insurance would be required. An electric assist pedal bike, for example, there is no requirement to insure, despite the fact that several members of parliament have advocated for compulsory insurance for electrically assisted pedal bikes. That has not happened yet. That could be the system that a government would bring in place if they legalize private e-scooters. The main problem is we don't know if they will be defined as vehicles, motor vehicles, or more akin to bicycles.
Okay, that's interesting. I've not really thought about it as more of a bike than less of a motor vehicle. So I think as well, a lot of people that own privately owned e-scooters could be younger people. So let's talk about the younger generation for a moment. So what are the legal consequences, especially for young people caught riding private e-scooters, essentially illegally? And how could that affect their future motor insurance premiums? This, I believe, could have a long-term impact. Is that right?
Absolutely. There's a wide range of penalties that they could face depending on what incident they're involved in, or even if they're involved in any incident at all. As I said, obviously these things are illegal to use on a road. And if a rider is stopped on a privately owned e-scooter by the police, then they can be fined up to £300 and they can have what's called an IN10 endorsement put on their record, which will put 6 points on their license if they have a license, and this will stay on their record for 4 years. Having an IN10 will increase the cost of their premiums by up to 20% for the next 4 years or so. So if you are a young driver, a young license holder, and you already face high premium costs because of that, you are now looking at even higher premium costs because of this. But there are other penalties that they can face. If they are caught riding an e-scooter while having consumed alcohol, for example, then they can face the same penalties as if they were driving a vehicle while intoxicated. They could face £50 fine for riding on a pavement. They can have a £200 fine for using a handheld device while riding. There have been cases where people who have been found liable for dangerous driving have gone to prison for up to 2 years. So there are some very serious possible penalties for riding a privately owned e-scooter.
Okay, and you mentioned the IN10 endorsement. So if somebody of the age of 16, they have their provisional license and then they get this IN10 endorsement, that will then go on to their record or stays with them on their record. So it would essentially drive up their insurance even before they've been allowed to drive a car.
Correct. That's for the next 4 years. I should also add, of course, that the other thing that will happen in all of this is the police will confiscate your e-scooter. So whatever you paid for it, you've lost that as well.
Okay. Therefore, there have been a lot of cases where this has happened. It drives up premiums even before people have driven a car. So do you think there is sufficient public awareness around the legal risks and insurance implications for riding e-scooters illegally? Or what more can be done, if not, to educate the public? It seems like there's a lot of misinformation out there.
There's a lot to answer there. As to public perception, I think there is virtually no public perception. People don't understand that it is illegal to use a privately owned one in public because they are so readily available. You can go to any number of shops on the high street. You can go to any number of online retailers and you can buy these things. And they will generally say somewhere down at the very bottom of the page that you must use these only on private land. But you have to look very hard to find that information. So the majority of people don't understand. And there's been no real campaign by anyone apart from every year you'll get various police organizations who will mention that you shouldn't buy your child or grandchild a private e-scooter because you can't use them in public. But apart from that, there has been no widespread campaign throughout the year to inform people of any of this. And the majority of people don't find out the sort of penalties that they could face for riding one of these things until they're stopped, until they're facing them. This is all a substantial problem, and it's part of the reason why these things are gaining in popularity, because people simply don't know that they shouldn't be using them.
Okay, so you mentioned the police just a second ago. Are they stopping people that have privately owned e-scooters on the road? Is that part of their job to do that? Are they doing it?
Some are, some aren't. It's a tricky situation for them. In some cases, you will get certain police forces that will make an effort to stop and educate users of e-scooters. And in other places, they will specifically avoid stopping e-scooter riders unless there's no chance of any harm to the police officer, to the e-scooter rider, or to any third party. And that is obviously not going to happen very often. Again, this is one of the things where it is not really advertised. It's not widespread knowledge. But you do get places where e-scooter riders can ride without too much concern about the police stopping them.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so moving on to the next question then. What legal measures can be taken to mitigate the risks associated with uninsured e-scooter riders? Are there any successful examples from other countries that we could learn from?
The uninsured driver's agreement, the MIB's agreement, is what we have in place at present, and it works. The MIB, they're not overly happy with the amount of money that they're spending on this, but it is a system in place to assist victims who suffer as a result of e-scooter riders causing them harm. Problem would arise if e-scooters were reclassified as something other than a motor vehicle. There is nothing in place that we know of that would then give victims any sort of compensation. So at present, the uninsured driver's agreement is the best thing we have. As to other jurisdictions, France and Germany, for example, privately owned e-scooters are legal and they require insurance. So you would be able to use the insurance from those riders of those e-scooters to get compensation. But in other jurisdictions, Ireland being the first one that comes to mind, there is no insurance requirement. And we aren't yet sure of what sort of system they have in place to compensate victims in that instance. We don't know of anything that works better than the uninsured drivers agreement.
Okay, so looking ahead, what future legislative changes do you foresee that could impact the use and insurance of e-scooters in the UK? This is a rapidly evolving area, and I'm curious about what's on the horizon.
Well, you say it's rapidly evolving. The problem is that it's not evolving rapidly enough. We have seen virtually little change in terms of legislation since 2020. The rental schemes were introduced and they've just gone into a kind of long-term stasis. And there has been chatter around something must be done. Everyone recognizes that something must be done. Everyone in the insurance industry recognizes that something must be done about privately owned e-scooters. They are, as I said, increasing in number substantially. There's approximately 1 million of them in the UK now, but nothing has been done. And there has been no real talk of anything being done since 2022. And from what we understand, the Department for Transport isn't really paying much attention to e-scooters anymore. They've moved on to thinking about dockless rental bikes. And obviously, a lot of their attention is being focused on nationalization of the railroads and expansion of Heathrow and Gatwick. They are very stretched for resources and they have a lot on their plate. E-scooters seem to have been pushed off their agenda. So we don't see a lot of anything coming forward. And that is a problem because the numbers of e-scooters aren't going down. The number of incidents continue to climb. There were almost 1,300 incidents involving e-scooters in 2023. There were 6 fatalities. And you see news articles several times a week. There was one 2 days ago on BBC website. An 8-year-old was involved in an incident. He was riding an e-scooter and was hit by a vehicle. He went to the hospital with serious injuries, and we don't know how serious they are, but that could be a very expensive claim. And obviously it will affect him long term, and it will affect psychologically, at least it will affect the driver. This sort of story isn't going away, and something needs to be done legislatively to address what is going to be a growing problem.
Yeah, and like you said, there seems to be more and more cases and not enough awareness about the dangers of them for people that are riding them and also for motorists as well. They're unpredictable.
People who ride these don't understand. It's not just the legal side. It's not just the penalties that they face. It's also that they are less safe than cycles because of the center of gravity, because of the speed, because there's just less metal around the rider than there is with a cyclist. They cause more serious injuries for people who are on cycles. And most of the people who ride these aren't wearing helmets. And most of the injuries are to the head. Just leaving aside the legal aspect, whether an e-scooter rider gets compensation or not, they still have to live with any long-term head injury, neck injury, shoulder injury, and no amount of money is going to make up for that sort of injury.
For sure. And also just drawing back on the fact that a lot of people that are riding these e-scooters have never been or don't know and are not aware of road safety as a vehicle, or they don't know the road signs or how to go round a roundabout or using the correct lanes. These are also road safety implications that do probably impact or cause a lot of the incidents that happen.
That's right. And the other issue is that I can only say this anecdotally, but you see a huge number of e-scooter riders on pavements where, of course, they absolutely shouldn't be. And that's going to increase the incidents with pedestrians, including in some cases, very small children. And it's a problem across the entire road network and across public areas where it's pedestrian only access, because these can go anywhere a pedestrian can go simply because of their physical size. Legally, they can't go there, but physically they can.
Yeah, you can't put a bollard up on the paths.
No, quite. And even if you did, a human can get around it, then so can an e-scooter.
Exactly. So more thought needs to go on that. Definitely raising more awareness is key by the sounds of it.
It absolutely is. And just another point in terms of discussing the injuries and the life-changing injuries that e-scooter riders can suffer. Most of the e-scooter riders who have these injuries are younger. They're younger than 30 years old, so they're going to live with these injuries for a lot longer.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely going to continue with the impact. Thank you, Michael. It's been really good to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you very much. This was fun. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Journal Podcast. You can find useful links in the show notes and related articles on the Journal website, along with further podcasts. Please like, review, and subscribe. Until next time, goodbye.